This episode of the Deep Thinkers podcast is brought to you by Rush Club Nation. Rush Club Nation is a fitness competition league that incorporates competitors that are not only professionals that do this for a living, but also amateurs who have a 9 to 5 job who can go out into the gym and crush it. Rush Club gives them a platform to showcase their athletic ability, a high production platform. When these guys come out, they have their names called. They've got the smoke, the lights, the walkout song. It's actually really cool. So it gives them a platform to showcase their athletic ability. And not only do they include professionals and amateurs, but they also include veterans, specifically members of the adaptive community, people who have lost limbs and who still work out, who still inspire people. Very, very interesting to watch these people compete in fitness competitions. If you're not working out, and I definitely was not working out the first time I went to a rush club, I felt a little scolded by example. No one said a word to me, but I definitely was like, okay, if these people who have lost limbs in traumatic ways and have um, pulled everything together to where they can still work out and they can go out there and get it done, then I should probably be working on it too. Rush Club Nation, you can reach out to them online. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on YouTube. Go ahead and check them out. And when Rush Club is in your town, be sure to buy a ticket and go out and support the cause. This episode of the Deep Thinkers podcast is brought to you by Bright Island Outreach. Bright Island Outreach is a group of individuals, many of them dentists or dental professionals, that go down into the Dominican Republic multiple times a year. They are networked with local dental schools down there, and so they take dental students that are from the DR or going to school in the DR, and they take mobile dental units and go into these impoverished areas to provide pro bono work for the good people there who otherwise wouldn't have access to good dental care. They start with education and they teach them about oral hygiene. They also do fillings, extractions, root canals, and cosmetics. So they do a nice wide variety of procedures to take care of the people down there. Like I said, they go down there multiple times a year. So it's not like they're just showing up and providing a service one time and then disappearing into the wind. They take care of these people down there and they make sure that they get the repeated dental work that they need. 100% of all the donations given to Bright Island Outreach goes to the cause. So the people that are working for it don't make any money off this. They just get out of it what they put into it, and it always makes you feel good to serve people and help other people, particularly when those people can't help themselves. So if you're looking for a charity to donate to, this is a great cause. All your money that you give will go to the cause. And if you want to get involved a little further, if you have an adventurous spirit and you want to go down to the Dominican Republic with this group, they also let you do that. Dr. Eric has been doing this since he was a child. His dad is a dentist, and so his family would often do these trips, so he's well versed in experiences like these. So check them out at brightislandoutreach.org. Just one item on the housekeeping list before I dive into the interview with Dr. Kevin Folta. Um, I do this podcast more or less entirely on my own. I seek out my guests and ask them to come on. They come on through the goodness of their heart. I'm still very much a small podcast still. I do the recording, I do the editing, I do the marketing, pretty much everything. Having said that, I have had some amazing people in my life who have helped me along the way. The person I'd like to talk about today is Sam Lisker, Samlisker. If you are editing digital content, no matter what your experience level is, do yourself a favor and add Sam Lisker on YouTube and Twitter. He is an editing ninja. He puts out videos twice a week. He's very friendly, extremely knowledgeable, very cool. I was a total stranger who reached out to him on Twitter, and he There was a lot of dialogue back and forth. He took the time to understand what my issue was and presented me a solution that worked. I couldn't have done this without him. So if you're editing digital content, whether it's audio or visual, give Sam Lisker a shout if you have any questions or anything like that. He is a Final Cut ninja, and he uses other editing software as well. Got a good YouTube following, so go ahead and check him out. SAMLISKER. Hello, Planet Earth. Today I have with me a very special guest, a guest I've anticipated for a while, and been looking forward to having him on for a while. Someone who always has something interesting to say and always backs it up with facts and science, which is refreshing in today's day and age. I have Dr. Kevin Folta with me. He's the professor and chair of the Horticulture Science Department at University of Florida. Hello, Dr. Folta.
Yeah, hi, Jesse. How's it going?
I'm doing great. How are you out there today?
Oh, real nice. Another beautiful day in paradise.
Excellent. Well, it's a little warm out here. We were in the middle of monsoon season, so I'm experiencing a mild taste of Florida weather, I would say.
Yeah, it gives you a little sense of what we go through on a daily basis, but you don't have to shovel the sunshine. So
yeah,
compared to my days in Wisconsin,
so I'll take it. So thank you for coming on today. I first heard about you when you were on the Joe Rogan Experience, and at that time I was a little on the fence about GMOs. I heard all the horror stories, all the scary stuff that goes around about them, and had seen the anti-GMO community take such a strong stance on them. Anybody that's that strong on something kind of makes you stop and pause a moment. I listened to you and actually felt a whole lot better about GMOs after I had heard that podcast. Everything you said was so logical and it made so much sense. And you really went away from this is scary and you just don't know about this to no, we know exactly what this is. We've studied this, to the 10th degree. We know exactly what this does. And then I did a little more research on you and found out that you are indeed a man of your word and you do a lot of great work. And kind of became a fan of Dr. Folta since then. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do and the important work that you're involved in?
Well, I really appreciate that. That's a very nice introduction. My main job, though, isn't necessarily, speaking on podcasts, even though it feels like it lately. My main job is serving the state of Florida, and my job is an administrative job where I oversee kind of research coordination and management of 50-some faculty statewide. Help out with lots of budgetary issues there, and work with helping promote young scientists and their development within our system. And that's probably my most important job. But I'm also a research scientist, and I do a lot of work in a couple different research areas. I have a lab of 13 people, experts from all over the world. It's a wonderful group, very sweet people. And I study the genetic basis of flavor. So what are the genes that control the flavors of things like different volatile compounds that are present in strawberries and other small fruits? And we study how light controls the way plants behave. And our thinking is, can we contribute to using specific wavelengths to essentially talk to plants in a language they understand? And this is great in these indoor vertical farming operations, these controlled environmental agriculture operations. And we're contributing to that in some way. And we have new technology that we've invented where we're identifying novel compounds that potentially could be used as the next generation of plant growth regulators. So awesome. Not fertilizers, but things like herbicides that would be environmentally safe and safe for non-targets. So we're working on all these different areas.
That is awesome. What you said there, environmentally safe and safe for non-targets. That is one thing that as you get further into, I'm not a scientist, full disclosure. I actually failed 7th grade science, had to take it again, but I got a B when I took it again, along with, actually it might have been a C, but it was probably a B, along with the current B in the science class I was taking in 8th grade. So my
my academic record with science a little rocky. I was kind of a knucklehead growing up. But now I have a love for it. I have an interest and enthusiasm for it. And one of the reasons I love it is because whenever there's a problem, you have brilliant minds working on the solution. And when you said safe for everybody or safe for non-targets, that's something that, listening to your Talking Biotech podcast, something I've been a little bit more familiar with. By the way, you run a great podcast.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
And entertaining. I really enjoy it. And any of my listeners out here, go ahead and look up the Talking Biotech podcast online. If you're into gardening or plants, or even if you're not, if you just want some good information about the type of food you eat, it's a solid podcast. It gets a little in depth. So if you're a novice like me, sometimes you have to rewind it and really listen in to kind of get it. But it's full of information.
Well, that means a lot. I think some of the most intriguing episodes are the ones on familiar foods, things like coffee. Yes. Or potatoes. Where did it come from in time and space, and how did humans participate in changing its genetics from a wild plant to something that has a very useful commodity that humans enjoy? So really interesting stuff in there, and really good guests, and they're the ones who drive the whole thing. I just sit and ask questions.
Well, you do a good job of it, and your guests are fantastic as well. So when you talk about domesticating these wild plants and turning them into something that's very useful, that's kind of what you're into. Why don't we talk a little bit more about that for a moment, if you don't mind?
Well, I'm very interested in general in the big picture of how do we solve problems for people and the planet, and how do we keep farmers in business? How do we give industrialized world consumers higher quality food so that we make better choices? So if the strawberries taste better, maybe we'll choose them rather than chocolate. Right. Nothing wrong with chocolate, but I'm also really a heavy-duty environmentalist. I think about our impacts on the environment, and right. I have extreme concern for the poor, the people who have nothing in the world, especially those in really abject poverty. So I just look at genetic engineering as another tool to address all of those concerns.
Absolutely.
And it's nothing magical. It's nothing, it's a tool to solve problems.
Absolutely. For me, I ever since I've done a little bit more reading up on GMOs and things like that, I hesitate to use the word research, just because of the whole "I've done my research" bit. Anybody who says "I've done my research," my first question is, "Oh, really? What lab did you do your research in?" Is it phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3? What are you researching? So I read up, and ever since I've read up, it talks, basically I've been a little more vocal about GMOs and how they're safe and how they're important. And as you can imagine, I've been met with a bit of backlash on it. Not crazy amounts, because I'm mostly talking to my friends and family. But it's interesting to see how misled people are on the topics of GMOs. One of the first things I say is, have you ever eaten a strawberry? I'm like, yeah, obviously. Okay, well, then that's a GMO. Have you ever eaten cabbage or spinach or any type of lettuce? That they all came from the same plant, and they were all domesticated and then genetically modified to be different varieties of the same plant, or of a plant with the same origin. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you obviously you get more crap online, Kevin, for someone who doesn't deserve it than probably anybody I know.
Yeah, I think so.
So what are some of the ways that people like ourselves who understand and support GMOs, what are some of the ways that we can talk to our friends to give them good hard facts and good solid science about GMOs?
Well, this is a really important part, and it's something that I study very much, independent of my science research. Let me just step back a second. When you talk about the term GMO, and you said, strawberries are GMOs, everything's been modified. You're exactly right. Everything has been modified from some sort of antecedent, some sort of previous form that showed up in nature by humans. And we changed it because we were selecting the best of a given set of plants that were coming through just traditional breeding and selection. And those are technically genetically modified. That's why I steer clear of that term. I always use genetic engineering.
Okay.
Because that speaks very specifically to changes that we as scientists install that are very precise and changes that we understand versus genetic modification, which can be a wide range of very ambiguous meaning. So I think that the precision in language is our best first step. Let's talk about genetic engineering and the way that we use precision to create a change which addresses some sort of issue for either people or the planet. And I think that's really the best way to start.
I agree. I like how you've kind of clarified that term for me a little bit, genetic engineering as opposed to GMOs. A little more focused, like you said. I think I'm going to start using that. But let's talk about strawberries. Now, I may be mistaken, but is it true that that strawberries? What are the origins of strawberries?
Wow, that's a good question. So strawberries are an interesting creature. Strawberries, if you look at them in their most simple genetic form, which is a set of chromosomes from their maternal parent and a set of chromosomes from their paternal parent, just like us, one set from each. That's the basic strawberry that they find in fields throughout North America and throughout the Northern Hemisphere. And very simple, very small. They taste great, but little tiny berries. Maybe you've seen them in the forest. But throughout time, those chromosomes double spontaneously sometimes, and you get larger berries with larger amounts of chromosomes. It's pretty interesting in plants how that works. And so the modern strawberry is really a marriage of two different strawberries, one that came from South America, one that came from North America. In North America, colonists brought it back to Europe in the 1500s. And it sat in French botanical gardens as this oddity from the New World. And then in 1712, a spy, this is a great story, a French spy was down in Chile looking at Spanish fortifications down in the area and brought back a strawberry plant from South America. And so you had North American strawberries, South American strawberries living side by side in a French botanical garden, and they got together, cross-pollinated, and a teenager named, I can't believe it, Antoine Duchesne. His father worked at the botanical garden, and he would join him and study the plants. And this teenager discovered the modern cultivated strawberry.
Wow.
As this marriage, this cross hybridization between a North American and South American form. And so a really interesting history of ships and spies and French teenagers really led to the development of this, the very first versions of this crop that we all enjoy.
Yeah, it's I've got to tell you, since I started talking to you about strawberries, my output this year increased by like 1,000%. I think the year before I got maybe 5 strawberries off my plants, and this year I got probably 50 between the 2 plants I had, and they lasted a lot longer. Strawberries can be fickle creatures, especially in the Arizona heat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and it depends a lot on the varieties you choose to grow, and some of the better tasting ones are really rather difficult. They can be difficult for production, and they can be difficult to store after you harvest them. But the best tasting ones are ones that are not amenable for modern production.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to improve.
Right. Now, let's talk about real quick while we're on strawberry specifically. Let's talk about the work you do with light.
We've started to steer a little bit away from light and strawberries, just because light is really important in the way it tells the plant information.
Okay.
And strawberries and other types of plants flower depending upon light signals and length of day.
Right.
That's one of many signals that they integrate. But our focus on light has really turned much more to smaller format crops like sprouts and microgreens, where we can control the flavors, the colors, the nutrient content, and we can control that by adding different wavelengths of light to a mixture. So what it does is essentially allows us as scientists to be able to steer the growth and steer the product. So if I want to have a green lettuce at the end of 2 weeks, I can go one direction. If I want to have a red lettuce, I take the same genetics, add different light. It's almost like saying you could take a gray wolf and turn it into a Dalmatian or a Chihuahua or a Great Dane just by changing the light that it sleeps under. You're essentially you're taking the same general genetics and then pulling it in different directions by using signals from the environment. Super cool stuff.
Yeah, that is amazing. So is it, my brain just automatically shoots to this right now, and calm me down if I'm getting a little overzealous, but is it possible to assume or think that there may be new vegetables on the market in the future that are essentially just created with light?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think you're going to see a lot of interesting new things because we've been currently only growing here in the States the plants that have been domesticated in population centers over the last several thousand years, right? Because where people lived is where these plants came from. Right. So very few plants that we consume originated in North America. I mean, very few. Just about everything comes from somewhere else, which is always a great lesson for folks. And I think we're starting to see this idea of de novo domestication. How do we domesticate the weeds that are already here and the plants that grow well here, the plants that have their native pollinators here? How do we domesticate them and turn them into food? And this was a big deal back around World War II when people were worried about how they would get food. They would go out and try to develop these beautiful books on things you could eat and things you couldn't, and what would taste good and what would kill you. And we have to revisit that. So I think between new genetics and looking at environmental skewing of plant behavior using light, we'll have a whole new collection of better food items that are meant to grow here in North America.
That's amazing. I'm glad you brought that up. I actually had a discussion with I don't even remember this person's name anymore, but it was a couple years ago. And they were on the other side of the argument, talking about how they felt like GMOs were not safe and how they shouldn't even be consumed. And I was trying to just break down the science for her. I was like, listen, we're talking about poor people who have no infrastructure. They have no agriculture departments in their countries. They have nothing essentially. And what scientists are trying to do is take the plants that grow there locally because they grow there. I mean, nothing grows there except for weeds and roots and rocks essentially. But they want to take what does grow there and add more protein to it. They want to add more vitamins to it. They want to add more sustenance to it. Once I started going down that road, it seemed like they softened a little bit on their argument. But people get the idea that genetically modified foods somehow are just about the man making money, and it's for me, it's I often try to explain, like, no, listen, there's a demand for food. That's why, biotech companies, that's why companies develop these things so that the supply can meet the demand.
Oh, sure. No, I'll jump in on that. I mean, it's biotechnology and genetic engineering are simply a tool. And, just like a screwdriver, right? I can turn screws and build a house and Habitat for Humanity, or I could jab it through somebody's jab it into somebody's heart, right? I mean, what do you, and so those decisions are really based upon on the user. And to say that we should ban screwdrivers because somebody's going to use it in a malevolent way is really a bad idea. Genetic engineering allows us as scientists to add a custom precision trait, and this new technology of gene editing gives us tremendous agility and control in this area. But the basic idea is, can we take plants that are grown in these areas, especially in the developing world, things like cassava, banana, rice, maize, all these organisms that don't have much of, they're low in protein, they're low in vitamin A, low in zinc, other essential nutrients. And using technology, you can boost those particular traits or put them there if they never were there. And that's what's really great. How do you create something that can alleviate human suffering just by adding a gene, say from another plant, taking the gene that makes a carrot orange and putting that into rice or putting that into cassava?
Right.
And if you could help fortify the world's staples, imagine the difference you could make for people. And I think it's so important for us to, as science-friendly folks, to use those as the examples.
Right.
They want to go right away for, like you say, the man making money. The man making money and the woman making money are farmers.
Right.
They're the ones who benefit from these technologies.
And that's such a good point. These technologies wouldn't be developed if there wasn't a demand for them, if there wasn't a need. I've spent not as much time on farms as most people, or some people, but a little more than most. I have a neighbor here in Mesa, Arizona, who owns a wheat farm in Nebraska. And I was privileged enough to spend 2 weeks during harvest time out there. And man, I'll tell you, wheat fields right before they harvest are beautiful. They're just the way they wave in the wind. It's just the color of them. It's awesome. So, I mean, I get it. I've been in, little farming communities. This was a small town of Potter, Nebraska, not that far from the Colorado border. And I think there may have been 200 people that lived in this town. And this was a farming community, and they had real concerns. They had concerns about Canadian thistle. They had concerns about, weather patterns and natural disasters. And any single one of those farmers, if you were to approach them and say, listen, I have got a seed for a new type of wheat that is resistant to this pest or resistant to this thing, any one of them would jump on it. Like, their attitude would be, you mean one less thing I've got to worry about? Me and my brother run this farm. It's just the two of us. We've got 1,000 acres. You mean I don't have to worry about that? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the sad part is that there are a lot of technologies that already exist in wheat that would allow fewer inputs on the farm, meaning fewer controls for fungus or for insects. There's a lot of technology that already exists. It's been proven and it works, but we can't use it. Farmers can't use it. It hasn't been deployed yet because of the fear of pushback or embargoes against American wheat. So they don't want markets like Korea, South Korea, to say we're not going to accept American wheat anymore because of the genetic engineering component. And so good technology sits on the shelf, spray the sprays and cost farmers money, add that environmental impact, even if it's just the fuel to run the sprayer.
Right.
We don't have to have this same impact on our planet if we could use the best technologies, but we can't because people push back. And that's why we need to go back to the idea of how do we use technology in smart ways to really make better decisions about food and farming.
Right. Absolutely. Superstition, it seems like, blocks a lot of good technology from advancing. And that's basically all it is ignorance and superstition on the topic that keep people from embracing it.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that for a second. I think that and it ties in with a question you answered earlier. Like you had asked, what do we have to do to educate these people? Or you phrased it something like that.
Right.
And that's been the problem, is that scientists have come at this as we need to educate. We need to make these people smarter about the technology. And that's our wrong approach, because they're appealing, like you say, to superstition. They're appealing to fear. Right. They're appealing to kind of these reptile brain parts of our thinking, which is very, very powerful. That when you threaten somebody, by people, doing something with your food is considered a threat.
Mm-hmm.
even if it's engineering it. Like people will say, I like it the way it is, the way nature gave it, which isn't true, as we
Right.
discussed earlier.
Right.
But the idea is that people, if they have plenty of food, they have plenty of dollars, they can go buy more if they need it. They can afford the $4 head of lettuce if they feel that that's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
The, people have what they need, so they're very protective, and appeals to fear and appeals to superstition and pseudoscience are very strong.
Right.
And so as scientists, we can't correct that by simply saying, here are the facts. We did that for a long time and it never worked. We need to be speaking to people about the values. How does this help the poorest in the world?
Right.
How does this help the farmer? How does this help the consumer and the environment? Those are the areas that I emphasize. And I find that when people who are against technology realize that I'm on the same page they are in terms of our concerns,
Mm-hmm.
then they start to be a little more amenable to thinking about ways technology can be used to remedy those situations.
Absolutely. Once you crack that outer shell of defensiveness, that's when some real progress is made on the topic when you're talking about genetic modification.
That's exactly right.
I know for me, I think I asked you that question. I reached out to you and asked you that online maybe 6 months ago or something like that. And since I've taken that approach with people, it's been like, look, listen, the poorest people in the world, not only do they not have food, but they also don't get to vote on it. Now, we have plenty of food, and our superstition is preventing us from increasing the quality of these people's lives. And so once you take that approach, I think people realize, like, well, wait a minute, I do have it well. I can go to, within a mile of my house, I can go to a supermarket and get food with origins from anywhere on the planet. To the point where if I don't like something, not only do I not have to eat it, but I don't even have to look at it. I don't even have to go in that section of the store if I don't like dairy or things like that. So, I mean, I think with food in general, Americans get a little disconnected about its origins, and especially about where people are wanting to take food and what goals are with food. So, but yeah, I think your approach with that, to talk to people and to educate them about what the goals are and what the end game is, like people not dying of starvation, before 30, people not going blind before the age of 25 because their diet has nothing in it. They're eating essentially just empty calories in what food they can get a hold of. So, I mean, I appreciate the advice you gave me on that, and it has been helpful. For me, it seems like when you boil down the anti-genetic modification argument, it really boils down to just American privilege. We have it so good here that we can turn away food if we don't like it. Where
That's right.
majority of the planet wouldn't even think about being able to do that.
Well, that's where in the American privilege, but also the European privilege. I mean,
Right.
the
Right.
industrialized world, has tremendous advantage that they can make these choices, and so we are vulnerable to those fearful messages that when everything is good and you have everything you need, that reptile part of the brain becomes very vulnerable to messaging, especially negative messaging about things like food. If you ask somebody in the developing world, they don't have that same vulnerability because they're thinking about this with a part of the brain that is, I need to put together the best information I can to get what I need for my family.
Right.
And so they're trying to put this together using logic and reason. And so for them to say, here's a new Matoke banana that has enhanced vitamin A and protein and iron, to them that says, that's perfect. That's exactly what we need. I sat on a panel a couple of years ago, and some gentleman from NARO, who's an organization in Uganda, he was in the audience and he was watching a group of scientists talk about labeling genetically engineered food products. And I should say food products from genetically engineered plants. There's no product that's engineered. That's crazy. These are plants that are engineered, and then they give us the same thing that we get from non-engineered plants, which is an important nuance. But he was listening to this conversation among, essentially, as the world goes, affluent, white Americans discussing labeling of genetically engineered products. And he stood up and said, here you are arguing back and forth about labels on food, a decoration on the package. He says, the people in my country just want food. And it's a very sobering thing to share and listen to that sentiment, because if we're really out to create good, positive change, our eye is off the ball. The target is totally screwed up, and it's time for us to really start thinking as science enthusiasts how we can refocus people who maybe have very good intentions on solving real problems.
Absolutely. Sometimes when these arguments get a little more heated, I usually come around with, listen, there are no vegans and no anti-GMO activists in the developing world. Food is food,
Sure.
It's and most Americans are horrible with nuance. We just don't. We want to look at a topic and be like, oh, that's the topic. We don't really want to dive into it and understand that when this goes up, this goes down, and when this goes this way, that goes that way. We just kind of want to look at it and get the screenshot as Americans. So, and it's on a topic like GMOs. The nuance is everything. Like the details that are found in the nuances of this are the difference between understanding what it is and succumbing to superstition.
That's very true. And time will not be kind to the superstition and to the reactive decisions that really harm others. I think that as we go forward, you're going to see an increasing display that the lack of use of technology to help people ends up having severe impacts that we really recognize as really bad moves. I think we're going to look back at this time as a time when we could have done something to help people and help the environment, and we chose not to.
Right. When you mentioned helping not only people but the environment, my mind went back to the Joe Rogan podcast for a moment. Let me ask you a little bit more about the EnviroPig.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating. Can you dive into that rabbit hole a little bit for me?
Well, sure. Some of the biggest environmental impacts of agriculture do come from animal agriculture. And what do you do with animal waste? And with pigs, the waste is a substantial issue. How do you deal with it? And especially keeping it out of things like rivers and out of waterways, where it can have very strong impacts on environment. And EnviroPig was a genetically engineered pig that had an enhanced enzyme in its salivary glands that would help digest or remediate phosphate. So phosphate coming out of waste is extremely environmentally important issue to control. And EnviroPig had the ability to break down remediate phosphate inside the pig's body, so it was taken up better and used more efficiently. And the waste was very low in phosphate.
Okay.
Great idea.
Yeah.
And they were alive for a while, and right now the only EnviroPigs on the planet are embryos in a tank of liquid nitrogen in Guelph, Ontario. So this is an idea that was a beautiful idea that never really ended up being used the way it was intended.
Just if that technology was implied alone across the United States, the long-term implications of just that one organism being introduced to the food chain could have a massive impact. It just, when you hear about things like that, it's just like, okay, guys, like, what do you want? You complain about we're ruining the environment, but then when we come up with a solution, you throw your hands in the air and you have got to have one of the most frustrating jobs in the world in that regard. When there's amazing technology that's there. Go ahead.
No, very true. It's when in my job as a university scientist and then as a university administrator, I get to see the beautiful work that's being done all over the world. And it's not Monsanto, Dow, Bayer. It's University of Guelph. It's Utah State. I mean, it's everywhere. They're public universities and public franchises. It's the government of Uganda. It's the government of Nigeria, the government of Kenya. These are small companies. This isn't this big agrochemical cabal that people say it is. The solutions are coming from everywhere. The problem is that a university like mine, like my lab, we can come up with a genetic engineering solution that can have tremendous benefit for farmers or the poor, and we can't use it because it costs too much to deregulate. And people say, well, the deregulation bar has to be extremely high. We need to keep these companies out of this space. All it does is harm university efforts that would benefit everybody.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about public universities real quick, because you touched on a topic that I think is fascinating. I didn't realize that in every state there's a public university that is dedicated to the agriculture of that state. Like in Arizona, we have U of A. In Florida, we have University of Florida, where you're at. In Utah, you have Utah State. So let's talk a little bit more about that and what those universities are all about, and what they're working on and things like that.
Yeah, this is really a crown jewel of American agriculture and American government. Back in the 1860s, Abraham Lincoln and after the Civil War, part of the idea of revitalizing America was to how do we help farmers and how do we help agriculture? And the Morrill Act, which is named after Morrill, who was, I believe, a representative, maybe a senator, but in Congress, a congressman who was very close with farming, and in a very elegant 1 or 2 page document, created the land grant university system. And the land grant system says that we're going to put research relevant to agriculture in every state, and we're going to put a university that does the research, that teaches the students, and that has extension, that has an arm of what it does that goes out into the field and works with the farmers directly. And so it's this teaching, research, and extension stool, 3 legs on the stool, that really allow us to do what we do. And it means that the research that's happening is relevant to the state and relevant to the farmers in the state, and that we're teaching students to take jobs in those industries. And it's an extremely important part of places like Florida and California and Texas and other states, of course, too. But we're big ag states. In Florida, California, we don't grow any GMO stuff here. I mean, barely any. I mean, this is all research that's relevant to traditional specialty crops that are really important for our farmers and really important for the health of consumers.
Nice. Now, going further down this road, say I'm let's take a scenario and let's assume for a moment that I am a grad student at one of these universities, and I'm studying a recent GMO or genetically engineered plant, and I find something wrong with it, like something that slipped through the cracks, something that's bad or faulty, and I expose it. What basically the line I'm going down is, say we'll use the big ominous Monsanto. Say I'm a grad student, I find that some Monsanto corn actually there's something wrong with it and it doesn't digest and it gives people stomach problems. If I expose that as a grad student, what do I have in store for my future?
Probably a Nobel Prize, probably a career of grants and other research for doing innovative thinking about an important food problem. No, that's our job. I mean, we are the organizations that can step into this. I mean, that's what's so cool about being a tenured faculty member. I can take on the Monsantos, Dows, and Bayers. If I found something wrong with their product, I would be the first person to report it. That's why we are in a really good position to be those gatekeepers, to be those watchdogs.
Yeah.
That's what we do. But instead, we, because we follow the science and follow the data, and the data show us that right now there's no evidence of harm from these products in terms of health, with some, limited environmental concerns that we can talk about. But because we do that, people say, well, obviously you must be owned by big ag and you're the ones who just do whatever they say. Completely the opposite.
Right. I mean, that was one of the topics you touched on lightly on the Joe Rogan Experience. Is like, listen, you would get a Nobel Prize if you exposed something like this. Hearing that was a huge puzzle piece for me. It was like, that's true. I mean, you look at the scientists that exposed, I don't know, the guy that Russell Crowe played in The Insider, the guy that exposed the tobacco industry. I mean, when science gets out, the whistleblower is usually, whether it's in media or whether it's, in time, usually honored as a hero. I mean, they exposed bad science and did a lot of good for humanity. So it's, when people talk about scientists that are public scientists that work at land grant universities, and they talk about them as shills or whatever, it's like, I don't think they realize the motivation that scientists have to go the other way. I don't think they realize how difficult it can be for scientists to get funding on anything.
Well, that's true. And think about it this way too. When people go after me online as hard as they do, and they trash my record, they trash me, they threaten me and my family, the things I go through, and you heard what I'm all about. I mean, I'm about better flavored fruit and vegetables. How do we grow plants in light environments? My research has nothing to do with genetic engineering. I am an administrator that funds students to study organic research. We who are you taking out here?
Right.
And by going after someone in your land grant system, someone who has a leadership position in a land grant university, aren't you kind of shooting yourself in the foot?
Absolutely shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, yeah. I actually a couple weeks ago stepped into your shoes online a little bit. I was like, okay, I'm going to be talking with him in a few weeks.
Poor guy.
And so, on Twitter, I started to engage a few people that were already having discussions with you. And my whole thing is this. I'm a podcaster. I work for a publisher. I don't have any dog in the fight when it comes to GMOs, crops, plants, anything like that. But I know that there are people that devote their whole life to it. And they are devoting their whole life to solving problems for the poorest of people, solving problems for farmers, things along that lines. I don't do a whole lot other than raise awareness and talk to people about the issue. So for me to sit there and shit on scientists that do devote their lives to this, it's kind of like I would just ask people, what are you doing with your time? What are you doing? Dr. Folta is trying to solve world hunger. He's working on this issue, this issue, this issue. What do you do with your spare time? And a couple of these people just decided to get snarky. A couple of them just quit talking to me together. There was one woman that completely owned me on Twitter. She started posting pictures of community gardens that she did throughout the U.S.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
She completely owned me. And all I could say was, those are amazing gardens. One of them's in my community. One's in Mesa, Arizona. And essentially we disagreed on how the plants were grown. She's all about organic. And let's talk about the organic industry here in a moment. But let's talk about land management and land use real quick. Most people, and when it comes to organic farming, this will probably segue perfectly into organic farming, but when it comes to organic farming, most people don't realize that it takes more land to farm organically than it does with our modern agricultural system. Do you know the exact numbers on that? Isn't it 15 to 20% more land, or?
It depends a lot on your specifics, right? And that's, again, we
Right.
go back to nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you talk about what crop you're talking about, and what kind of market, what kind of other issues you have to deal with. In any agricultural scenario, you're looking at inputs and labor and everything else. So people can make broad statements about yield and the relative yield per unit of labor, per unit of input, per unit of land, genetics, and it does take more to grow things in organic context. That's fine, because if the goal isn't to produce more, the goal is to produce the same with less.
Right.
And so that's an admirable thing. The big problem is that in the scope of feeding more people, you do have to worry about land use. It's a very important issue. The best place to find information on that is to look at the work by Brooks and Barfoot. It's a pair of ag economists who every year publish a report that goes deep into the economic benefits and impacts of genetic engineering. And one of the places they look is in the area of land use, and how land use could be impacted negatively by going back to 100% non-genetic engineered plants, or by going back to, or by moving into organic production.
And that's Brooks and Barfoot.
Yeah, it's a pretty it's at pgeconomics.org, I think, or .com. They're a pair of ag economists that do a series of different analyses on different agricultural issues, but this particular one is one that they dive into with an annual report that's pretty comprehensive.
All right, I'll have to check that out. Thank you for bringing that up. So real quick, let's talk about the organic industry as well. Is it just me, or is organic just an abstract word?
No,
I mean, not an abstract word, but a tricky concept.
It is. Because it has so if you look at the entire discipline, it has its roots in biodynamic farming, this kind of, which is kind of a kooky discipline, in my opinion. You're going back to areas like, you have to, you bury a cow horn in a certain orientation during a certain moon in order to have a better crop yield. It's things like that, which are really in magic more than
good hard science.
But the problem is that there was an evolution that happened, which had a very good intention, and that was, how do we reclaim nutrients from things like manures? How do we reclaim plant nutrients from reusing plants like green manure, or tilling? Mm-hmm. How do we use naturally based compounds as controls for insects and fungi rather than synthetic ones? And those are all pretty admirable ideas. The problem is when you start getting into the practicality, then organizations form that create artificial barriers that don't make any sense.
Right.
So a good example is, you can't use genetic engineering in an organic farm. And as we mentioned before, you have genetic engineering solutions that eliminate the use of any kinds of need for insecticides, for instance, or make them very low. And things like BT corn, which make a natural, so you use BT, which is a bacterial spore concoction. You use this on organic crops all the time, but you have to apply it. You buy it and apply it. In a GE crop, the GE crop just makes it itself. And so this seems like a great application for organic that they systematically eliminate, because they say, well, we can't have any genetic engineering on the farm. It's those kinds of arbitrary barriers that make it that take away from the good science that happens in organic, and I think it'll change going forward.
Yeah, one of the things that drives me crazy is when people say, well, I buy organic because I don't like pesticides used on my food. And it's like, really? Like, have you ever heard of arsenic? It's totally organic. They spray it all over your organic crops.
Well, not so much anymore. I mean, arsenic-based compounds aren't typically used in cultivation, at least not that I'm aware of.
Well,
There's a lot of other ones I can't.
That's something new for me. Now that I have new information, I can change my stance and abandon that rebuttal with arsenic. So thank you for educating me there.
Yeah, check that out, because I think that's overstepping a little bit.
Okay.
I do know that that there are a lot of other compounds, like things like copper, which is a heavy metal, which is frequently used, where if there are packing houses and operations that are in the supply chain for organic produce, that just like in conventional produce, the wastewater is a toxic waste, a hazardous waste, because of the amount of copper that's in it. And in fragile environments, places like Florida, it's not the best thing to be spraying at 6 pounds per acre.
Yeah.
And yet you could use a genetically engineered, in this case, let's say tomato plant, that would very strongly curtail the need for those types of applications in both conventional and organic.
No, absolutely. Dr. Folta, our time is running short. So we're probably going to have to wrap it up soon. But is there anything that you want to, anything you want to touch on that we haven't gotten to before we wrap this up? I could talk to you for 4 hours, and I'm sure our listeners could too. But you are a very busy man, and you're not spending all your time playing World of Warcraft. You actually have real issues that need to be addressed. So I don't want to take up too much of the time that you've been generous.
I don't even know what that is.
World of Warcraft? Oh, man. There are probably people out there going, "What?" It's an online.
Yeah, unlike.
Yeah, but that's okay, because I need good, strong followers at this point. If people are, people are gonna unlike me or unfollow me based on one of my guests not liking World of Warcraft, then it's probably better that I lose them earlier on in my podcast career rather than later.
Yeah.
Just for their sakes. So, you've cleared up a lot of things I wanted to, additional questions I wanted to ask you, and I've really enjoyed this podcast. Is there any shout outs or anything like that you want to say before we wrap it up?
Well, I would like people to look for more information and ask questions. And they can always reach out to me through any of the channels where I'm available. On Twitter, I'm at Kevin Folta, but you can email me. I get back to everybody who emails questions or concerns. The best place to do that is on GMO Answers, which is an industry-sponsored website. So it's industry-sponsored, yet people like me answer questions there because it's a place where we can do it. And someone in the industry put up the money to, sequester our answers in one convenient spot. If there's ever anything that was bad on there or false, I would never participate or recommend it. So it's a good place. And go there and ask your questions, and check out the Food Evolution movie. This is a new documentary that is in very limited release. PBS won't show it. Netflix won't host it. Yet it's a movie about genetic engineering and some of the solutions, especially for the poor. And it's a very compelling documentary that tells the truth about this technology and a different side that you never hear.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm familiar with the movie Food Evolution. I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard it mentioned, and now that you recommend it, I am going to actually sit down and watch it. Kind of a random question, but I'm kind of wanting to start to ask this question to a lot of my users. What kind of music do you like to listen to when you're in your drive or when you're just hanging out?
I think you'll be very surprised.
That's it.
I think if I had to, so I can tell you what I've listened to in the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
I've listened to Thin Lizzy and The Darkness and Motorhead and what else did I listen to yesterday? And then Bloodhound Gang came on accident. Just my phone started playing it just out of the blue, which was kind of scary.
I got a couple pleasure Bloodhound Gang songs that guilty pleasures there for Bloodhound Gang, so I get it.
Yeah, so I've got an eclectic interest, but I grew up a guitar player and always enjoyed a lot of guitar heavy stuff, and listen and still do. Nice. And still am very interested in listening to new stuff, but of course I like a lot of the stuff that's more when I'm working, on Saturdays, I sit here in my office and I listen to stuff that comes through. I don't even know what I listen to. But things like bittersweet and just like kind of more, easy stuff.
Yeah.
But if I'm driving somewhere or out in the field or cutting my grass, I like my ears to bleed, so I put on Van Halen, whatever.
There you go. Yeah. See, I was a concert promoter for 7 years in Utah, so I've been exposed to all types of music. I have a super wide variety that I listen to. If you're a Motorhead fan, you'll be interested to know that I recently signed a petition on change.org for Apple to create a Lemmy emoji. So hopefully we will see a Lemmy emoji popping up in one of these new updates. So
that's it's good that we're using change.org for those kinds of public services. I think it's
yeah, I found a lot of stuff on change.org, but this was one that popped up. I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, absolutely. I'll sign this one. So
no, very good. I commend your efforts.
Well, it's a small thing, but it's the small efforts that add up in the end to big changes. So
and we talk about what's important to us. It's about farmers, consumers, the environment, the needy, and Lemmy emojis.
Absolutely, Lemmy emojis. So and I'm sure I actually support multiple rock star emojis. I'm not just focusing on Lemmy, for the record. But Dr. Folta, thank you for your time. Thank you for the wisdom and knowledge that you've imparted here today. And I would like to have you on as a guest in the future. I think you always have interesting stuff to say. And I'm going to be taking a little more notes when I listen to the Talking Biotech podcast, because you cover some excellent stuff there.
Yeah, well, that's worth maybe mentioning to the, that's at talkingbiotechpodcast.com. We're coming up on our 100th episode. And I think the 100th episode will be someone interviewing me about my rat lab and what we do. And there's some really good ones that are going to be up, and some things that I really want that would be great for folks to listen to, especially about the ones where scientists are under attack. And this is an area I'm starting to move into to defend other scientists. I've been through hell.
Yes, you have.
And what's happened to me was a real threat to my career. It was a threat to me personally, and I survived it. And because now I'm on the other side of it, I can now be the front line fighting it. And I can go out swinging on behalf of other people. And I love that job. My job as the enforcer now is really an important part of what I do. And I'm excited to really step in on behalf of others so that they don't have to go through what I did. And so I really encourage people to get involved in those issues. Absolutely. And defend the scientists that are doing the work.
Absolutely. Trusting scientists, and the scientific method is so important. Everything beyond fire and stick huts that enriches the human experience has been brought to us by science. And people, it kind of just drives me crazy when people will sit there and they'll be surfing on their cell phone while they're half listening to a conversation you're having, and they're like, well, yeah, you can't always trust scientists, man, as they're sitting in an air-conditioned home on a grid built in a modern city. It's like everything that you're like, are you serious? You can't trust scientists? Like, everything that you're doing right now is brought to you from science. So I agree that the mistrust of scientists, but particularly the scientific method, is an alarming trend in the United States that really needs to be reversed.
Yeah, well, we're working at it every day, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You're an animal.
So, yeah, wouldn't have it any other way. This is the best, as good as it gets. So, thank you for having me on, and let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Folta. Thank you, Planet Earth, for tuning in. Signing off. And as always, be excellent to each other.